All right. Well, hello there. This is Tammy Tervoren with the Center for Financial Health. We offer these webinars to pastors and ministers to help them on financial topics, give them the best information so they can make wise decisions. And this is a really special one. We have a special guest here with us that is going to help go over a very important topic of protesting your taxes, your property taxes, that is. We know a lot of people are experiencing very high property values, and that comes along with a very big tax bill. So we're going to learn about what to do about that, or what you can do. And I also want to make sure I mention that the Center for Financial Health, we work to help pastors and ministers plan for a secure financial future in ministry. So we do that by offering a couple of things. We have one-on-one financial counseling with a financial counselor. We also provide ministers financial health grants that go through, invite pastors through a process of learning how to manage their finances, and also comes with a matching grant as well. And I'm going to pass along to Christian Messmer. He has been one of our great counselors. He's a certified financial planner, among other qualifications that he has. He'll share that with you. But he's been a really great advocate for pastors, and we're just so thankful to have him serving alongside us. And he's going to introduce our special guest. Thanks, Christian.
Awesome. Well, Tammy, it's great to be back and great to see you after a 4-month hiatus. So welcome back to the Center for Financial Health. I know I speak for probably every pastor who's interacted with you that we're very happy to have you back. So, welcome to May's Pastor Stewart Talk. And this month is protesting your 2022 property taxes. So if you're like most Texans, a few weeks ago, this little blue monster showed up in your mailbox. And if you're like me, your next response was one of exasperation. So today's guest is here to help equip us and to empower us to fight back. So I would, it brings me a great pleasure to kind of introduce and to have with us today Chandler Crouch. His bio is to us. What I love about Chandler is he's a real estate broker and founder of his own real estate company. That's great. But he's got a passion for fixing the state's broken tax system. And what I love most is that he has a job as real estate, and he has a passion for property tax justice. And he's combined those two to create a ministry to a broken world. So, as you can see, some great accolades, one of the top 200 agents, in real estate as per the Wall Street Journal. What I love is that he is Tarrant County's #1 property tax consultant. And probably my favorite thing ever, and we were just kind of talking about this before we started, last year, 22,000 protests, and he's on track for 26,000 this year. So the ministry's cranking, the business is doing well, and it's always great to see believers impacting the world for Christ using the skills that God's given them. So, with that, Chandler, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Awesome. Very good. Well, I tell you what, let's just do this. I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of what I'm going to go over today. And then I may end up sharing my screen and going over some slides just so I can stay on track and keep organized. But what you said is absolutely right. The way I got started in this is really, I'm going to give you a little bit of history. I'll tell you how I got started. I'm going to touch on the passion piece of it a little bit. Then today, I'm going to tell you how you can protest your property taxes and do it with spending minimal time. And I'm going to tell you the easiest, quickest path to do it. Then I'm going to go a little deeper than I normally go. But I also want to couple this with a little bit of an education about the property tax system in general, because once you can understand a little bit more about how the whole system works, then you will be empowered to be able to lead the people that you are that you have influence with to hopefully bring about a change that we really need here in the state of Texas. And unless you have a little bit of a foundation on how a foundation of knowledge on how the system works, then we're not really equipped to change anything. Unfortunately, this property tax system is a little bit complicated, and that's the reason why it's most people don't understand it, because our attention spans are this big, and we can't even agree on a good goal. We know that the system's broken, but anyway. All right, so let me start from the just a little background. I got into real estate in 2002, and whenever I got into real estate, I said I want to get into real estate, get rich, and then go help a bunch of people. And God had different plans for me. Fast forward to 2017, and I decided I got the opportunity to hit the reset button in my business. And I said, you know what, instead of just doing a typical realtor thing, like to generate business, like calling for sale by owner people or whatever, instead of prospecting and doing lead generation things, I just decided I wanted to start designing a business that I had dreamed of, that was really in my heart, that I felt like God was leading me to from the day I got into real estate. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to look for opportunities to serve people. And I believe if I do it strategically and I serve people and create value in that way, that it'll just be a step in faith. I believe that the value will show up, and somehow we'll be able to produce enough revenue to make this thing go around. And I tried a handful of different things, and then all of a sudden the property value notices started showing up in people's mailboxes, and that need rose to the surface. I got online, answered a few questions about property taxes, and the comment thread was just immediate. People all over the place had questions. It was far too many. The need was far too big for me to answer on a one-on-one basis. I made a video, it took off, and all I was doing was just looking to serve and help people with these problems and help educate people so they could go protest on their own. And then I started biting off. I would teach people how to go protest, and I would give them the information, and it took a long time. And then I found that a lot of times people would take the information and then not go protest. And so I just thought, you know what, I could probably just protest for them and represent them faster than it takes for me to teach them. And then I could actually go ahead and, do something, like actually make progress to actually help them. And so after the first year, I had protested for about 1,700 people, and I wanted to quit. And I literally prayed to God and said, God, it was horrible. I mean, staying up, working on it, it was miserable. And my whole team was exhausted. It was crazy. So at the end of the year, I prayed to God. I said, God, if you want me to keep doing this, you're going to have to make it really obvious this is the path you want me to be on, because I'm out. And I was just tired. And God opened some doors. I was during that window. Some relationships with different politicians opened up. Key relationships at the appraisal district itself. Doors were open there, and I took it as a sign and said, all right, God, I will just continue and trust that it's all going to work out. Here I am. That was in 2017. Like Christian said, last year we protested for 22,000 people, did it all free of charge. This year it'll be more than that. And in the course of it, I worked with State Representative Matt Krause to help. He came to me and said, hey, look, I understand you're in the know. You know what's going on, what problems exist, and what can we do to solve the problems? And I gave him my ideas, and he said, you know what, let's write bills on that. He put me in touch with his administrative staff or legal staff. We wrote bills, got them passed. I've played a role here at the appraisal district locally, and there you go. So there's my history. So let me explain real quick a little bit about how this whole system is set up. There are a lot of misconceptions about how it's set up, and I'm just going to share my screen if that's all right. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure I don't share the wrong screen. Here we go. Okay. So that's my background. I want to, and if you'll forgive me here, I am just going to thumb through some of these, and I may not hit every slide, but I will go through it. And here's a couple other teasers. I'll teach you how to protest your property tax value in any county quickly without having to go to the appraisal district. And that's coming. So let's see. There are two main ways. I'll tell you. One's through your settlement statement. If you purchased your property within the past, since January 1st of 2021, if you purchased your property or refinance and happen to have an appraisal, you can submit your closing documents to the appraisal district and have an easy win. The other one is an affidavit solution I'll teach you about But I believe that this whole idea of protesting is part of a fundamental right that we have to life, liberty, property. It's mentioned in a couple of the constitutional amendments or whatever. I'm talking out of my league. I just know that this is part of being a property owner and an American citizen. It's just part of the deal. To get taxed on our property is it has some moral implications. And I just want to mention this, since we're talking to a group of pastors, there are all sorts of different political beliefs. And sometimes people say, I don't want to protest because I believe in paying my fair share of taxes. And I believe in that as well. I don't think that anybody here is interested in, going without the services that are provided with our tax revenue. But here's a big misconception, is that when you protest, nobody receives less money. And that is so counterintuitive. But when you protest your property taxes, if you get a reduction, the government does not receive any less money. And I'm going to explain how that's possible. But in Texas, we don't have a state income tax. So we get our tax base from sales tax, property tax, and business tax, or other income tax. And if you look at the way our system is set up, you've got these different pies here. Well, this big piece of the pie is your property tax pie, and that's made up of all these other smaller entities. So when you pay your property tax bill, the folks that receive money are the school district receives the biggest portion. And then you've got the county, the city, and other special districts. Like here in Tarrant County, we have a hospital, JPS Hospital receives funding. And then we also have a community college and sometimes a water district. There are other little entities. So when you pay your property tax bill, it's not going to the state, it's going to local services that are vital. And that's how the funding is generated for some of those local services. And, I've got some other stuff here that you could get into, but I'm just going to zoom on to this. Here's a basic fundamental that's really helpful to understand how this whole system is set up. And I would actually amend this a little bit, and I would put the word exemptions. There you go. Now the slide is correct. So your property tax bill is generated using this basic formula. It's your property value multiplied by your tax rate minus your exemptions equals your tax bill. So when your property value goes up, yes, it does mean that your tax bill is probably going to go up, but that's only one part of the equation. The other part we have is your tax rate. And then you need to make sure your exemptions are in place. Your exemptions are more important this year than ever before because property values are going up so much. If you do not have an exemption on your property, like a homestead exemption or an over 65 exemption, or if you're disabled or a veteran, there are other exemptions you can get. But if you don't have your or if for churches, you got to get your nonprofit exemptions in place for your church to make sure that you're not overpaying your property taxes for your church. But those exemptions are saving people right now. And when you get your exemptions in place, or when you try to control your property value to make sure that you're not being unfairly overvalued, or to make sure that, or if there are things that you can do to affect the tax rate. And I can talk about that a little bit. But when you're doing these things, you're just being a good steward. You're not robbing anybody of tax revenue. To me, I tie it into a moral requirement that I have of being a good steward of the resources God's given me. And so that's it. So there's a different way to talk about this. Instead of using the word tax bill, you could call this the levy. That's what the tax assessor will call it. Or you could call it the budget. That's what your school district will call it. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit more. All right. So the problem with our property taxes is it's on 4 levels. Okay. Let me just speed through this because some of this stuff, man, I could just get into the weeds. But we've got a state level, a regional level at the appraisal district. You have these local entities, your school district. When they spend money, it creates the demand for your tax bill. They establish the budget, and that's where all this comes from. I can get into the weeds on all this, but some of this stuff is it's just a little bit too complicated, or more than what most people want. So I'm going to just kind of fast forward to this. We've got 3 governing bodies that make up the property value portion of that equation. Okay. It's the Central Appraisal District, the Appraisal Review Board, and the tax assessor. Okay. I want to just explain who these guys are. The Central Appraisal District, these are the guys that appraise your property and determine that the property value side of that equation. The Appraisal Review Board, these guys work usually under the same roof at the appraisal district, but it's technically a separate entity, and they are just there to basically hold an informal court session, basically an informal hearing to settle disputes if you think you're being overvalued. And then you've got the tax assessor. The tax assessor is the entity that sends your tax bill. So the tax rate, let's go. The tax rate is determined by the school district, the county, the city, those guys. The appraisal district determines the property value, and the tax assessor puts the tax rate. That they put it all together. They say, okay, the appraisal district says your value is this. The taxing entity says we're going to have to charge this rate. And so then the tax assessor just does the math, and they send out the bill and they collect the money, and then they distribute it back out to all those different taxing entities. So Christian, I feel like, honestly, I've gone into the weeds quite a bit already. A lot of this stuff, I know that whenever I'm speaking to a room full of people at about this time, I'm seeing eyes glaze over, and people are like, oh my gosh, all right, let me just know, how can I save money right now? And that's what I want. I'm going to teach you about that. But at the same time, you can see that the system has all these different components and all these different things. And I just want to pause for a second and say, Christian, do you have any questions about this so far that I might be able to answer for you that somebody else might be having?
No, but I do think what's important is to realize that at the end of the day, there are multiple entities that are responsible for the bills that we get. And it's not just one person or one party or one entity that all the responsibility kind of lays at their doorstep. So often, when these things come out, it's the local city that gets pounded with phone calls. But nobody's thinking about the school district where the majority of those funds are going. Nobody's thinking about in Tarrant County, we've got Tarrant County Community College or JPS. So all those different pieces layer in, and everybody gets what we would say that pound of flesh. So I think that it was really good to just kind of show, like, listen, there's lots of different people involved. There's lots of different, moving parts. So at the end of the day, as we're working through this, and as individuals who do like to get political, that seems to be something that is in kind of the Baptist DNA. There's lots of ways that we can get plugged in, and I'm sure that we could always deal with that later.
Yep. Very good. Yeah. So I'm just going to go back to this slide for a second and just talk for a hair longer about this equation, because if you understand this, then it really starts to fill out these areas of how do we see permanent change in the system as a whole. So we're gonna spend a lot longer on the property value side of this and how we affect that property value, how we can make sure that your property is fairly being valued. The tax rate, I mentioned, it's the school districts, it's the city, it's the county that establish a budget. And then once they figure out what budget they have, then they get here's what happens. This is kind of a twisted thing. And I think that there's probably somebody needs to write a law to change how this works. But a city or school district or county will wait until the appraisal district calculates all the property values. They wait until the appraisal review board, all the protests have been settled and the values have been certified. Then after that, the city or the county, they establish their budget based on what they think what they know the property values are. Then once they establish the budget, they can figure out the maximum rate they can charge people to generate, to fulfill that budget. They figure out, okay, well, we know that property values are, $5 billion or whatever it is. Then we just know in order to satisfy the budget, we have to multiply that 5 billion by this tax rate. And that's how we're going to solve our budget. And so it's done completely backwards than how my family establishes their budget. My family says, you know what? Here's the money that we have to spend. Now let's figure out how to make this work. Or we say, here's the money we have to spend. Now let's cut some things out to fit that. And these government entities do it the opposite way. They dream up things to spend money on, and now that there are some limitations on how much they can raise their budget, but it's still pretty wide open. So the rate portion of this, the only way that you can affect this is by going to the city council, school district budget meetings whenever they happen in August and September. And you go to the budget meetings, you just say, hey guys, you're spending too much money. You can do better than that. And that's what decreases the demand of this whole system. And so anyway, let's go back to what you can do right here, right now to make sure that you're not being charged too much for your property. So I want to say this. The number that the appraisal district is trying to determine when they are sending out your value notice is they're trying to determine what your property was worth back on April 1st of 2022. I'm sorry, January 1st of 2022. So in Tarrant County, our notice is blue. In other counties, it may be a different color. But when you get that notice in April, they're saying, hey, we think your home was worth $300,000 or $400,000 back on January 1st of this year. So even if you see houses selling for substantially more than what you got your value for, it doesn't mean that you still can't win a protest. In fact, the window of evidence that they're going to allow stretches all the way back to January 1st of 2021. So, and I'll get into that. So, in order to make sure your property, well, I'm going to say this again. So what actually determines the real world value of your property is what somebody's willing to pay for it. Until somebody buys or sells a property, anytime an appraiser or a realtor or an appraisal district or a property tax consultant, anytime any of those people try to tell you what your home is worth, really what they're giving you is their opinion of what they think it might sell for. We don't know what it'll sell for. And as you might imagine, the justifiable range that property might sell for can be pretty sizable. There might be houses similar to yours that have sold recently that sell for $30,000 more than other houses that have recently sold that are similar to yours. And so you might have a pretty large justifiable window to say your house is worth this. And so the appraisal district, a lot of times they're going to choose something in the middle or the top side of that range. And as a property owner, you owe it to your family to say, hey, look, how do I know my house would sell for that? I think my house would probably sell for a lot less than what they're saying. And I would say almost across the board, houses are overvalued just because when the appraisal district comes up with their estimation of value, it's usually based on what other houses have sold for recently. And all of those houses were fixed up and prettied up. All the issues were, taken care of. All the things that needed to be mended were fixed so that it will pass their inspection. And if you haven't gone through that same process to prepare your house to sell, then it's probably not worth as much because it needs some repairs. So I just thought I would mention that. So it looked like we have maybe about 10 minutes left. Is that right? I think so. So anyway,
if we need to start a new one, we can try to, if we need to, we could start another meeting and record that one and combine them later if we need to.
Gotcha. Okay. So, So here's what you need to do to make sure you're valued right. So the first thing to do is to file a protest. This gets all the attention, but it's a very simple thing. It might take you 5 minutes to do. And then after you file your protest, then later on, we're going to assemble the evidence and prepare for a hearing and maybe even try to avoid a hearing. So let me just hit step one first. Step one, filing your protest. That's the legal requirement to make sure you get your fair shake on this thing. All you have to do is take the value notice that they've delivered to you, turn it over and fill out the back side of it. There's usually a box on there that you have to check. And I think this year the legislature passed a new law that said there's one box to check that says market value is you're protesting on the grounds of market value and unequal. You just want to make sure that both of those items are covered. And I think that now you can, on every county's form now, you can just check one box to do that. All you do is check that box, sign the form, and send it in, and then you're done. Okay, with the legal requirement that has to be taken care of before the deadline. Now, after that, that's when you need to prepare to actually go to a hearing. And before I get into that, I also just want to mention this. There are some counties out there that have made this process very, very easy, and they have an online portal. And through that online portal, sometimes you can go on and spend 2 minutes, literally click a few buttons and get a reduction automatically, or just go on and click a button and it will file your protest for you. So I would just recommend that you go check out your Central Appraisal District website. Just Google your county name plus Central Appraisal District, and then go check out that website and see if they have an online portal. Okay. So let's say after you satisfy the legal requirement of filing the protest, then you need to prepare to justify your value. Whatever value you're going to propose, you need to get evidence for that. There's an offensive approach and a defensive approach to compiling this evidence. First, I'm going to go through the defensive. So the defensive approach is this. You want to ask the appraisal district for the evidence that they're going to use against you in the hearing. Okay. They're going to deliver the evidence, and then you can see the comparable sales, meaning the other properties they're going to use as justification to raise your value. And then your job is going to be to do the things that they are never going to do. It's very, very rare that anybody from the appraisal district is going to go out and actually look at all these properties to make sure they actually do compare to your house. And if you go through the hard work of driving around to look at these properties, you can determine whether or not you think they're actually comparable to your house. And you want to find reasons why they are either not comparable or they might actually prove that your house is worth less. So when you're driving around, some ideas would be if there's a house that's on, say, a golf course lot, or they have maybe a waterfront property, or they're adjacent to a creek or something that might add value and yours is not, then you would just say, hey, look, I understand you're using this property to say my house is worth this, but this is next to one of those things that's increasing the value, and mine is not next to that golf course or that creek. Therefore, mine has to be worth less. And when you go through the properties and start just analyzing them to see if they actually compare, you can usually find some holes in their evidence that justify a reduction. So that's one of the easiest ways to get a reduction, is just to find problems with their evidence. Then on the offensive side, there are two main things that you can do to justify a reduction. One is to use market data, and you would get this from a realtor typically, and you want to coach the realtor a little bit and say, hey, Mr. Realtor, can you get me comparable sales of houses that are similar to mine? And the thing they're not going to know to do is to go all the way back to January 1st of 2021, and that will be the beginning date. And they want to look at all the sales from that date all the way through March 31st of 2022. And if they look at that window, then now you can pluck sales out of January of last year, and most appraisal districts find those sales to be completely acceptable and in justifying the value of what is on your notice. And so if you do a good job with that, then you can get a pretty good body of evidence. And then the next step on the offensive front to get a reduction would be to document any repair issues, any condition issues with your house. And you would do this by taking photos of maybe cracks in the walls, photos of any plumbing issues, or anything that can be evidenced through a photo. And then the additional step would be getting repair estimates from contractors. And when you get these repair estimates, just keep in mind, we're trying to prove what we think the value of that property was back on January 1st of 2022. Okay. And so if you did a bunch of work to your house back in December, then, and you show that the work was completed and you've got a paid invoice that you're really proud of, that work you did in December, what you're actually doing is proving that you've improved the value for your property prior to January 1st. That evidence wouldn't work. But if it was an unpaid invoice prior to January 1st, 2022, then that works. Or if you completed work shortly after that date, then it basically proves that your house was not in good condition prior to that, and therefore you can justify a reduction there. So I could go into detail on all that stuff, but those are the main ways that you can gather the evidence. And then we're going to talk about what to do with that evidence. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions. Christian or Tammy, did y'all have any questions about anything that I just went over that somebody else might be asking themselves right now?
No, I think it's a really great start for us. Thank you.
All right. Terrific.
Yeah, well, I think I know what to do, which is really helpful. Like, even I feel like I could do that, which didn't sound as scary as I can imagine it sounds at first. So
it can be as simple as firing off a few emails. I know a lot of the pushback that I get about those steps is they say, well, I don't want to call a contractor or bother a realtor when I don't plan on using their services. Mm-hmm. And I can just tell you from a realtor standpoint or from a contractor standpoint, if I get an opportunity to make friends with you and serve you with somebody that's wired with my type of values, I'm more interested in serving you and truly being of value to you than I am getting your money. I'm just going to, again, walk in faith and say, hey, if I'm providing value and I'm of service, then I'm fulfilling a purpose. And I just believe if I do a good job with that, sooner or later, someday that business might come back to me. And so I personally don't have a problem at all giving someone comps. And so I would just encourage you, knock on those doors. Some people are going to be perfectly happy to do it. Some people aren't. Some people aren't. But that's what you need to do. Now, what you do with that evidence is the next step that we're going to talk about. I'm going to tell you how you can take that evidence on whatever level you've gathered it together, whether it's comprehensive or just some comps that you got from a real estate agent, or if you've gone all the way, I'll tell you how you can package that up and shortcut this process to deliver it and get an easy win. Or I'll also tell you a little bit about what to expect if you go all the way with it and go to a formal hearing at the appraisal district. So now what are you going to do with all that evidence? And this is part of a conversation that you need to have with yourself about how much time you want to invest into this process. And so I would say if you want an easy win, the easiest thing that you can do is just hire somebody. Google property tax consultant and you can hire somebody. You can skip all that homework. But let's say you've done the homework and you say, you know what, I don't want to hire somebody because it's going to cost a lot of money. Some companies out there will charge you 50% of what they save you. And it doesn't sound like a whole lot unless they save you a bunch. And then that bill could end up being enormous. I think property tax consultants are worth what they charge for the most part. But if you want to just skip all that, then you can Google property tax evidence affidavit, and you'll find a form that you can fill out and you attach your evidence. You fill out the form. You have to get it notarized, but most banks have a notary you can utilize for free. And you just package all that up and mail it into the appraisal district prior to your hearing date. And you never have to get out of your office or home. That document will sit in your place and they will have a real hearing there. And somebody will read that information live in the hearing, and you can have your hearing without taking the extra time. Now, that method is not going to be near as effective than if you go down to the appraisal district yourself. However, if that's not something that you're interested in doing, utilize the affidavit. That's your hack. That's your shortcut. Now, let's say you're interested in taking it a step further and you are willing to invest a little bit of time, then the first thing that I would recommend is just to get in contact with the appraisal district. You can call them, email them, or just drive down to the local appraisal district office. Most of the time, just walk in during business hours and ask if you can speak with an appraiser to informally discuss the value of your property. If you walk in and you say, I want to protest my property, they're like robots. They say, I'm sorry, you used the wrong words. They'll send you to a different department. So you want to informally discuss the value of your property, see if you might be able to reach a settlement prior to the hearing. And then you'll find usually a very reasonable person, as long as you have some evidence that allows them to justify a reduction. Most of the time they're looking to give you that reduction. They just need you to present the evidence that will allow them to justify that reduction. And a lot of times it's a quick conversation. It's not a high stress situation. They'll reasonably come to a conclusion, and that's it. Now, let's say you have that conversation and they don't agree to what you think is a reasonable conclusion. Then you get to decide if you want to take it to the next level. And this next level is the formal hearing. This is what gets all the attention because it's a very unforgiving process and it's intimidating. What happens is they will have a hearing date for you, and you need to show up at the time of your hearing. If you're late, they'll just dismiss it and you lose. But you show up to the hearing, and when you walk in, there most of the time it's like an office setting, and there's maybe a cubicle, and there will be 3 people at the cubicle that will serve as kind of like the jury. Then you're going to have another person sitting there that will serve as kind of like the prosecution, and this is a representative from the appraisal district that is going to present the appraisal district's evidence to that's justifying this high value. And then it's up to you to bring all the evidence that you've compiled, print 5 copies so that everybody in the room has a copy. You distribute that information, and then you sit there and you wait until they go through this formal process. It's like Robert's Rule of Order or whatever, where they say, okay, here, you'll have like 3 minutes to testify and present your evidence. The appraisal district will present their evidence, and then that 3-person panel will make a judgment on what they think that a fair outcome is. That 3-person panel, they're supposed to be unbiased, but they aren't really usually, because they're sitting there listening to these protests all day long. And I could go into why it's unfair, but you just have to know, you just sit there, you give your evidence. If you get a good 3-person panel, they will thoughtfully deliberate and usually come to a common sense conclusion. And I would say last year I did a bunch of protests. About 4/5 of the hearings that I did, actually they deliberated, they gave it good, thoughtful consideration, and they came to what they believe to be a fair conclusion. And that's all I can ask for. I'm not always going to agree with them, but as long as they've gone through that, then they'll come to a fair conclusion. They'll give you the value, and then you walk out the door either happy or mad. And if you don't like the result, you can even take it a step further and appeal the result, take it to arbitration, or actually even sue the appraisal district. And I haven't taken it that additional step, but I've heard that it's the success level when you go to arbitration is actually pretty high. It's just another level that you can take it to, and it's just never been worth my time to advance to that level. But that's the whole process from beginning to end. And I'm sure I left out plenty of things. And usually after I get done going over all of this stuff, people have tons of questions. But that's it in a nutshell. So, Christian, did you have any other questions that you think people might have had after listening to all that?
Well, I guess like the big question is like, what's the biggest pitfall? Like, there's always going to be a place, for example, you said, hey, make sure you check this certain box. So, okay, so I've done that. So that's done. What's the next biggest pitfall? So for example, you talk about like comparables. So obviously you want comparables in your neighborhood. Obviously you want comparables square footage wise. You want comparables as far as like amenity wise. I mean, that's kind of the issue. Like some houses, like you said, they've been fixed up to oblivion, other houses haven't. How easy is it to go that extra step? And then, what's some of the crazy stuff you've seen, where it's like, hey, knock on a neighbor's door. Hey, I mean, well, what you wouldn't do to save an extra $500 to $1,000 for some of us,
Yeah, I can go over. I've got stories, but the pitfalls, the biggest, there is no downfall that I am aware of for protesting. I haven't found it yet. And I think it's important to say this, that there's so many misconceptions that keep people from protesting. And I will just go through a few. Number one, if you are successful in your protest and you reduce the tax value of the property, it doesn't actually reduce the real world value. If a buyer wants to buy your house, they're not going to pay any less for it just because you won your tax protest. No appraiser, no realtor is ever going to pay too much attention to your tax value. And if anything, if I'm a buyer, I want to pay as few taxes as possible. So I'm going to be happy if the seller protested and got that value down. You don't end up on some kind of government naughty list. Nobody cares. In fact, I can make a case for how it improves the system. There's just no downfall to it. The biggest downfall would be wasted time. And if you go through compiling all this evidence, and now, Christian, you were talking about comps. You're talking about how to formulate the comps, which comps to use. Well, one of the biggest pitfalls is you put together all this evidence and you walk in and you bring them the comps that a realtor gave you. And then they say, I'm so sorry, these comps are not properly adjusted. Well, this is them just it's just maddening. What they need to do is you've got to compensate for differences in the square footage and differences in some of the larger amenities, such as like a swimming pool or lot size maybe. And this is where it can get kind of technical. And so a lot of times I don't cover this in these talks just because somebody might think, oh gosh, well, that sounds like too much work. I don't want to go to all that trouble. And most of the time, the appraisal district will understand that you don't do this for a living. And if you bring them some comparable sales, then you have a conversation, say, hey, I know this one's a little bigger than mine, so therefore it should be a little bit more expensive. But you're valuing mine even more than that one. So therefore, it should be way less. You can have a conversation like that without getting into the weeds of what the math actually looks like and getting overly technical with it. But that's it. If you walk in and your sales are not adjusted to compensate for the differences between your property and a comparable property, then they can just laugh at you and, say, sorry, this isn't going to work. Now, I'll say this too. Most of the time, appraisal districts have evidence that is lacking detail. So for instance, I know all the major counties, a lot of times they don't tell you how many stories the property has. They don't tell you if there's wood floors or granite countertops. They don't tell you if the property's been recently upgraded. There are a list of things that they don't include in the details of their comparable sales. And if you take the extra time to understand where the holes are, what details they don't include, and then you don't include any details that they don't include, but if there's something that they're not including that will work against them, then you get those details and provide them. Then you can really shoot their wheels off by going the extra mile to do some of this legwork that they're not going to do to prepare for that hearing. Does that make sense?
It does. And you mentioned earlier that I can request the evidence that they would present. So, obviously we've got till May 16th to protest. So we've got to start putting together our, kind of our work on our side. But when do we get that evidence? How do we go about getting that? Is this something on a form I've got to fill out here? Do I have to fill out something else? Like, how do I go about getting that info and then starting to kind of shoot holes in that?
That's a great question. If you're in one of these major counties that has an online portal, there's a good chance you could just create your online account and that evidence is probably sitting there waiting for you and you just have to download it. There are many, many counties that don't have an online portal. And so for that, I would recommend the first step is just email the appraisal district and ask them, how do I get the evidence you're going to use against me in the hearing? And if you meet any resistance going down that path, then you can file an open records request, and then they will be legally obligated to give you the evidence they're going to use in the hearing. So one huge benefit to this is that if they provide the evidence ahead of time, because of your request, then they're legally not allowed to introduce any new evidence in the hearing. And if you go through this process and then they do enter new evidence in the hearing, then if you decide to escalate that and appeal, then you're going to win your appeal because it's illegal. It's against the rules.
Okay.
And one more tip I just want to give: if you're bound and determined to go all the way with this, and you just feel like these little meetings, they don't give you enough detail, but there's nothing like seeing it firsthand for yourself. And all of these protest hearings are open to the public. And so if you go to the appraisal district and you say, hey, can I observe some hearings that are going on? Then they will let you, and you can sit in and watch a property tax professional conduct a hearing in a professional way, and you can see the arguments. A lot of times, if you just hang out long enough, you can catch them on a break and ask questions. And most property tax consultants are ecstatic to be able to answer questions and help, because they see the pain people are going through. And even if you don't hire them, I mean, they're just happy that somebody else is speaking their same language, and they can provide that assistance. So that's one big tip. That's how I learned, is I just went down and observed.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
I have one more question, Chandler.
Oh,
I think
nice.
just really quick, because I know you hear, you have family, friends, or people get excited because their property is being valued at such, everyone's moving to Texas, like people get excited about it. So how do you, and I know you said that it doesn't affect the actual like selling value or market value. So I just want to reiterate to people that going through this process won't take away from the actual market value of the home.
Correct. Yeah. And I'll take it even a step further. If you protest your property taxes, then that means that if somebody was going to buy your house, the loan officer that's helping the buyer, they're going to set up their loan payments to collect property taxes in their loan payments with their escrow account. Well, if you protest your property taxes, you can get their tax burden down, and therefore their payment is not going to be so heavy with property taxes. They could actually possibly be able to afford to pay you more purchase price. So, but yeah, absolutely. There's two elements to this. Number one, protesting your property taxes is not going to reduce how much you could sell your house for. I can make the case, like I just did, that you could sell for more. And then the other thing is, if you see houses selling for an arm and a leg, don't be discouraged. Those are current day sales. And the sales that happened last May were substantially less than they are now. And we can use that as evidence in your protest, because we're trying to prove what the value of the property was on January 1st of this year. And so I would just say, just protest. And here's a big reason to protest. Even if you think you can't get a reduction, even if you get a reduction, but you say, well, I've got a homestead capped value and I know I won't be able to get it below that, I would say still it's a good idea to protest, because there's a brand new law, it was passed in 2019, that says if you have a successful protest and you reduce it $1, then the burden on the appraisal district is even greater than next year. So it increases the odds that they're not going to raise it in 2023. And so you should protest this year, at least for next year. It helps you, put you in a better position for the following year.
I guess kind of as we conclude, when, some folks are looking at their appraisals and they're saying, hey, it only increased 5% year over year. So, and some folks, they're looking at it's a 15 or 20% increase. Is there kind of a rule of thumb where, hey, if you're seeing 10, 15, 20%, like jump all in? If you're seeing a little bit, like, I mean, is that a way to use it against the district as well? I mean, is there a cap on what they could raise technically versus what it was last year?
That's a great question. And I would say if your property value went up 10% and you think, oh, they only raised it 10%, the truth is they probably raised it a lot more than that. And the 10% number is probably just being controlled by your homestead exemption, because there's a 10% cap that mandates the maximum they can legally raise the taxable value of your property. And in every county, they use different terminology, but usually if you think, oh, well, they only raised it 10%, the truth is their opinion of the value of your property could have gone up 25%, or in Austin, 50%. And you're just capped at this 10% gain. Still protest. There's no rule of thumb, because it's this high number, the number that went up 20 or 50%, is the number that it's the appraisal district's opinion. There's this justifiable range. You owe it to you and your family to protest, because you just never know what the data behind the scenes would support. You might be able to go in and get an easy win. Most of the time here in Tarrant County, they'll send out that blue notice. And if I go look behind the scenes at the evidence they're going to use against me in the hearing, they automatically, in a lot of situations, they say, hey, look, we know we sent the value notice out, and the value says it's this high. But when you come into protest, our evidence to support that value is actually going to say it's actually not near as high as what the blue value notice says. So you can get an easy win and get them down to their own evidence level. They call it the indicated value here in Tarrant County. But it's you should absolutely protest no matter what, even if you think it's fair. Just if nothing else, it helps them keep accurate numbers to make sure that they're giving your property the attention that it deserves so that your family isn't paying too much.
Awesome. Well, Chandler, thank you for kind of educating us and our pastors. And, as pastoral budgets are pretty much always stretched thin, the burden this year for the increases that we could see can really jeopardize the financial health and safety of our pastors. So we appreciate you just kind of coming alongside us. And, we're excited for your ministry, brother. And, hopefully we can have you back another time and we can hear a little bit more about kind of how ministry plays into business. Because I think that's a fantastic opportunity, continuing to bring light to a dark world. And there is probably no darker place than the halls of taxation.
It's nasty. Well, I truly appreciate each and every pastor. There is no more important nonprofit out there. If you can save a soul, then obviously it's not up to us to save, right? We're just the farmers here. But when you play a role in being the conduit that God uses to do His work, and you create that environment for people to have that relationship with God and Jesus, that it's just there's nothing more important. There's nothing more life-changing. And this material element of life, if you can protest, and I can help you a little bit to alleviate some of that burden that allows you to focus on the spiritual work you're doing in your ministry, then it is all worth it. It's a good thing. So thank you for the time.
Awesome.
I truly appreciate it.
Well, it's
Thank you
great.
so much.